If you are not monetizing your hobbies, what are you doing? You're clearly not on the same grind set that I'm on. So within the first minute of this video, the first on my channel, I'm going to tell you to like, comment, and subscribe, or bell, or whatever does that thing that makes me the most money. There's no guarantee that I will post a second video, of course. This is really just an overview of every book I read that had even the slightest inkling of, oh, I liked that. I figured 50 was enough, so I cut it off there. Maybe I'll have a hater video where I talk about all the books I don't like. Maybe we'll just start here and see how it goes. Before getting started, you might be like, is this guy even in the realm of my literary tastes? And the answer is yes. Or you could just like look at the books around me and sort of see like, oh, do I recognize any of those? If the answer is no, maybe not. What I've got on this list are mostly literary fiction, but with a smattering of nonfiction in there. A couple non out of that, but I'd say it's probably about 70% literary or contemporary fiction or classics. Let's talk innovation. Who's doing it like this? Who thought of the music stand? That was me. Just to start at number 50, so Quite On, The Stories and Studies of Strange Things is by Lafcadio Hearn. So Lafcadio Hearn's a really cool guy. He went over to Japan when pretty much no white people had ever been, immersed himself in the culture, and decided to collect all these little short ghost story related tales into this little volume. Some of them were like from books, some of them were from people he talked to, and basically he was like the white world's introduction to Japan. Neat, cool from a historical perspective. I didn't love every individual tale. I just felt like a lot of them were like super goofy, but it was like a cool, neat thing to read. Ray Bradbury is obviously like the GOAT, but he doesn't always have amazing work. This collection of short stories proves that. So A Medicine for Melancholy by Ray Bradbury is a collection of short stories, of which some of them are science fiction related. So anything in space, that stuff was incredible. Everything that wasn't was very hit or miss. My favorite non-space story was The Wonderful Ice Cream Suit. It's about these guys that have this cream white suit that they wear that they think that suit gives them this like ability to be charismatic and have these power with ladies, and it gives them good fortune, that sort of thing. So they're like protecting this white suit at all costs, even at their own bodily harm. It's funny, it's interesting, it's clever, but you know, there were some real duds in here. A lot of them are very short, and the overall collection is pretty short. So no harm, no foul. I have read 2 of the 3 little stories, novels in this collection. So this consists of Lady Susan, The Watsons, and Sanditon by Jane Austen. I have read Lady Susan and Sanditon. Sanditon fell off the top 50 because it is an unfinished work. How am I supposed to rate a book that DNF'd me? But Lady Susan is a lot of fun. The ending, it just is very abrupt. It doesn't really do much for me. But she is a clever older woman that basically seduces men and uses her wit to get the things that she wants. She's very conniving. It's epistolary, so it's all told in letters. So there's that little added element of it. It's clever, it's fun. It's short, but it just doesn't do a lot. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Charles Dickens. I love his characters. He's very funny, very clever, but the stories sometimes just have a little too much in there for me. A little too long. Great Expectations, a favorite of many, and some of the characters like Miss Havisham was excellent. But you know, I couldn't get behind Pip, couldn't get behind his lifestyle and his personality. Thought he was a bit of a prick. And that kind of stunk it up for me because I was like following this guy bored for about half the book. But I can't say it's not clever, funny, or a romp. And the fact that they have this old bride sitting in her room with her molding wedding cake, wedding dress, hasn't changed since her wedding, and decides to screw up the future of her granddaughter because of it is hilarious to me. Horseshoe Crabs and Velvet Worms by Richard Forty, I think is how you pronounce his name. This is a really cool concept. He goes over a lot of these like living fossils, like ancient species. He looks at the origins of life and points out like mussels that have been alive today since like pretty much the beginning of mussel development, like how they've lasted this long. The subject is really cool. I don't know why he chose to do this, but he wrote it like he was trying to write literature. And if you can't do that, don't write that. There's a lot of empty pages, not empty of text, of course, but empty of content. and it doesn't set the scene or captivate you like I've read other books that do that. So the information in this book is really cool. The way it's written, a little bit of a struggle for me. I also, because of that, I don't remember a lot of the stuff about it. And I think that's a little bit of an indictment of it. I've read 2 Isaac Asimov books this year. I will probably read Second Foundation in 2024. But man, there is not a lot to love in the writing of these 2 books. So I definitely liked Foundation more than Foundation and Empire. Foundation felt like a really cool establishment of this neat world. It set up sort of like a short story format, which I think was originally written in short stories and then pushed together into one book. It's about a professor that predicts the history of the universe based on this new field of science that he's developed, and he reacts and puts a colony out in response to that. It's a really neat world, but the writing is flat and abysmal. I cannot recommend this. I don't know why the Hugo and the Nebula were like, or whatever award, useless award did this, but they were like, this is the best trilogy of all time. It's like, you couldn't have picked something a little bit more good. Every so often I feel this compulsion to read Stephen King, and then I regret it. Carrie was okay. It's about a girl who is raised very conservatively, almost oppressively so. Actually, not almost, oppressively so. And she has these weird powers that she develops, and when pushed over the edge, she decides to use them. It's sort of told in retrospective. It has like clips from different interviews, and it's okay. I get it. I get why people like it. Here's the problem, Tom. You were too ambitious. When you call something the history of the world, you kind of have to cover it all. Not really possible to do in 300 pages, is it? If he had titled this A History of 6 Drinks, I'd be like, that is boring, but I will read it and find it very interesting. When you title something like The History of the World, I'm expecting all of these things to come together, and they didn't. Honestly, I really think he should have focused on 1 or 2 drinks, because some of the information in here is fascinating, very cool. This is all right. I think it could have been done a lot better if he narrowed his focus, but would he sell the book? Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin is more of a historic relic for me. It's the first bestseller in U.S. history in terms of, it was like the first book that really exploded on the market. It is explicitly anti-slavery propaganda. I think Harriet Beecher Stowe would enthusiastically agree with me here. She follows the story of Uncle Tom, an older slave who is pushed down south further and further as he goes from master to master to master. It gets worse and worse and worse each time. Mostly she talks a lot about the splitting up of slave families and what that does to the mothers and the children. Look, the story is surprisingly readable. It definitely could have done with a fine scalpel to remove a lot of that unnecessary stuff, but she would disagree with me because all of that stuff just furthers her point of slavery bad. I think there's a lot of criticisms that could be lobbed at this book as a piece of anti-slavery propaganda, but you know, it was cool to read, to think like, what influential figures have read the same book as me? And it wasn't that bad of a read, so that's why it's on the list. Oh, also, Uncle Tom is not at all an Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom in the book is actually pretty brave, and he goes against his white masters. I did a really poor job reviewing this book the first time around, so different shirt, new me, better review. The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini is a story about a boy and his father and the relationship between them. It shows the descent of Afghanistan from somewhere that was relatively safe to dangerous for them and their neighbors, and they look to escape. Primarily focuses on the relationship between the son and his father. There's a lot of heavy stuff that goes on here, including rape, murder, in ways that are pretty sad, but also very compelling. The problem is, to me at least, the author doesn't let you figure anything out. He has to forecast everything that's happened at least a page or so ahead of time, to the point where it gets frustrating once you figure that out. The story is very touching, and it paints a portrait of a place that I really don't have a lot of knowledge about. It is interesting to see a native Afghani person discuss Afghanistan in a way I really haven't heard from before. So for that reason, I really value the story that's told here. I do think that the sort of melodramatic writing style does make it a little more difficult to enjoy it the way I wish I could have. Underwater to Get Out of the Rain by Trevor Norton is part memoir, part whatever the hell he wanted to write at the moment about the ocean and history of the ocean studies. There is so much useless information in here that I gobbled right up. But the fact that this sort of unfocused narrative had so much in it that I was like, come on, get it moving. That's why I had to bump this book down. It's neat. I don't think Trevor Norton's story is particularly captivating himself, but the way he tells it and the way his passion for the ocean shines through does make this a pretty good book. Shirley Jackson's The Lottery and Other Stories is a collection of a lot of her short stories. There are some real standouts in here, and I liked the interweaving thread that she makes this James Harris character, either him or a member of his family that's sort of close by and influencing the plot of the stories. They're supposed to be like this insidious evil that's always present. But there were a lot of stories that were just like, isn't that strange? I'm gonna need a little bit more than weird stuff to read about. I've seen plenty of weird stuff in my life and can imagine plenty of weird things myself. Give me something more. Uzumaki by Junji Ito is not a book I own. That's why I don't have it on the stand, but maybe I can figure out how to add a picture in post. In this graphic novel, manga, whatever you want to call it, it is about a town that starts to be fixated on the spiral motif, and each section of the manga is like a new episode that has something to do with spirals. I've been told it's really creepy. It wasn't creepy to me. It was just very funny and fun and just amusing. There were a couple images like this woman whose skull starts to cave into a spiral that I was like, ooh, that's pretty cool. If you're looking for a fun, interesting time, read it. If you're looking to be scared out of your wits, watch a movie. I read 2 Catherine Arden books this year, The Bear and the Nightingale and The Girl in the Tower. The Girl in the Tower was a real dud. It took the events of the first book and just made the main character make some pretty crazy, wild decisions that was, to me, really uncharacteristic. This is a fantasy series it's a trilogy that is set in this like medieval Russia where there's still like people living out in the forest, and it's like there's a lot of forest imagery and there's these sprites, and she ends up allying with some, fighting some, and it sort of creates this cool, fantastical environment, which I actually appreciated. Writing wasn't too bad either. So I have the 3rd book. I will probably read it at some point, maybe this year. I cannot believe that a book that was hyped this much was so mid. It's fine. The way people talk about it, it's like the best thing that they've ever read. Sometimes when you have 2 main characters that are so smart for their own good, you have to do more than show them reading Proust, for fuck's sake, in high school. Nobody's reading Proust in high school. Or they're scrolling through articles. Like I had to read all about how these smart people are scrolling through articles. But mostly they were just like annoying and miscommunicated and just like weren't talking to each other. I guess that's what makes them normal. I think there were parts of it that I liked, but people already talk about those. So why can't I just be like a hater? This was my first and only book so far I've read by Lauren Groff, and I do not remember a single story. Don't even remember the title story. I don't know what to tell you. I remember liking it enough to rank it here on the list. But when I go back and read through, I'm like, oh yeah. I do remember that sort of. I think there's one about a Chinese restaurant that I liked more than the others. Beyond that, it is just gone. This is, I feel like, the point in which we get to the books that I actually really liked. Elaine Feinstein's Loving Brecht is about Frida Bloom, a fictional character, and her toxic, dependent relationship with Bertolt Brecht, a real person, the playwright and the poet. I think what squicked me out a little bit about this book is that they made this real guy seem like an asshole, and he probably was, but you don't need to make up a fake story to show that. If we sort of pretend like Brecht is fictional, what I did like was, as the relationship is sort of growing in its toxicity, the simmering of World War II and the rise of the Nazis is just like happening in the background. She's a socialist Jew, and she finds herself unable to find a home anywhere. In Germany, obviously, but also in Russia, and then in America, it's not really a good time for socialists during the Red Scare. So she is just sort of lost and screwed, essentially. I did like the relationship between the two of them, though I don't think he seemed as manipulative as the narrator wanted us to believe. He told her pretty much like, you can leave at any time. There's only one paragraph that seemed out of character where he seemed like he was more manipulative and cruel than otherwise. Does that make sense? I have the mass market paperback of James Missioner's Hawaii, and it's a little too thick to sit on the stand, so I'm just gonna hold it here. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm gonna hold it down here. You're just gonna have to remember the title and author now, aren't you? It is about the history of Hawaii. It is a true historical fiction book like no other. It follows historical fiction as a genre exactly how I'd imagine historical fiction to be. It starts at the very beginning of when the Hawaiian Islands sort of uplift from the ocean floor all the way to the year he wrote and finished the book, which was right as Hawaii was getting statehood. So he is chronicling the genealogy of like all of these families that land on the island, and their development. And it's really well done how he interweaves all these timelines and shows the history of the island. And this is a perfect thing to bring on my trip to Hawaii because I learned so much. It's so historically accurate. But it's not just like a dry recitation of the history and the facts about Hawaii. It's like a really captivating story. And every time you're bored, he lets slip in like a little scene where you get to watch the characters eat like some really delicious food. It's really cool, really well done, and I probably won't be reading any of his other books unless I'm going to the place he wrote about because he did this like 10 times. Filthy Animals by Brandon Taylor is a short story collection that is mostly interweaved. I don't think all the stories are connected. Maybe there was a thread that I missed, but I don't think it really matters. I don't think any single story in this collection was truly a standout. However, I did like this grouping of the stories that feature Lionel and his entanglement with this other couple. He sort of breaks them up throughout the collection, so they're not just like one after the other. And I found myself sort of reading the other stories and being like, yeah, this is good. Let me get to the Lionel stories. And I kind of wish he had made like a broader novella out of them instead of like the short story collection. Nothing was bad. I liked all the stories, and that's sort of why it gets so high, because as sort of a combined work, it's pretty good. I've yet to read any of the other works by Brandon Taylor. I've got The Late Americans and Real Life on my bookshelf, but I feel like it's never bad to start with a short story collection to get a flavor for their style, and I definitely will be reading at least one more of his other books. If I don't like that one, then maybe I give up. Kazuo Ishiguro is a Nobel Prize winning author, so this is not really the book I thought that he would write, and I had a lot of different expectations going into this. I thought this would be like a very true to form literary fiction, and it was actually science fiction. This is because I don't read the backs of books. This is a TikTok darling book. Everyone seems to love this one. I think it was like runner-up for the Booker Prize as well. It is about a group of people that start off in this boarding school as children, and it's mostly about their interplay and their relationships. It's a little about like what makes humanity. Is it art? Is it love? But really the magic of this story is in this gradual unfolding of figuring out why they were in this special boarding school to begin with and what makes them different. And I can't tell you anything about that because that would pretty much spoil the book. I think there were some criticisms I had, probably pretty minor. They live in this apocalyptic scenario and they didn't even try to resist it. Like they just let it happen, and that confuses the hell out of me, because for all this talk about them being what makes a human, they do a very inhuman thing and just accept fate. I don't know, maybe that is a human thing. The ending just seemed like a little like, oh, that's you're just gonna, all right. There are 2 books about the rise and fall of WeWork. I've only read this one, so I can't say which one's better, but Billion Dollar Loser by Reeves Weideman is so captivating. I did not think that this was such an interesting story. Every time it looked like Adam Newman was on the precipice of failure, new money came out of nowhere to save him. What a fascinating story about the collapse of this crazy business. FiveKarat Soul is a short story collection by author James McBride, and there are some short stories in there, but there's also like these collections of like mini novellas that are in the book. The one at the end is about the zookeeper and all of these animals that learn to communicate with each other and with him, and he sort of learns this animal language. And it is absolutely bizarre, very creative, but bizarre. Definitely soured me a little bit on this collection, but the middle stories about the FiveKarat Soul something bone band is such a great picture of kids living in this neighborhood, this predominantly black, poor neighborhood in the middle of a city. There's a couple short stories in here, like the one about the train, the first short story, which I did like, but really the gem is in that middle band piece. God, what a brilliant writer John Updike is. If only he wasn't so horny. I can't recommend this book to anyone else because the main character is such a turd. Rabbit Angstrom's pinnacle of achievement is being the star basketball player on his high school team. From then on, he doesn't know how to be an adult. He runs away from all his problems, and he feels trapped in this like tightly constrictive, conservative society that he lives in. The problem is, he's an extremely unlikable, rude, misogynist guy who, when he does escape his problems, him and everyone around him is severely punished. I wish the theme of the novel was a little less conservative, a little less based in religion, but you cannot deny the talent of John Updike. There's this like little segment where he's driving and he's trying to escape, and he's driving all the way down to West Virginia, and he's like going on through all these back roads. He's like struggling with a map. He's like going around blind corners quickly. So brilliantly done. I remember the scene where he's like waking up, he's like falling asleep, and to show like that the time is passing, like the light is like scattering along the floor in like a specific way, and just like how he writes that is just so incredible. And then he just like decides to write about like a complete loser. There's 2 more of these books that I'll definitely read, but there's definitely some really high highs in this book. Just, I'm not sure how to feel about the rest. Here's another thick one that I'll have to hold. It is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Edmond Dantes, I think is how you pronounce the main character, I could be wildly off on that, is a sailor, and then his friends and associates conspire against him, having him locked up in prison. When he escapes, he vows revenge on all of them. And he creates this highly complicated, concocted scheme that lasts over the course of over 1,000 pages. The book is very good, very captivating. It is not a piece of high art or high literature. It is very quirky, but it absolutely draws you in. Like, this does not feel as long as it should. I was blown away by how well this was done. Not that it is without error or mistake. It was serialized. Of course, with any serialized work, it isn't going to be finalized before publication. And it was split up. It was actually published over multiple years. Besides that, it is still a really captivating, interesting tale. And I like by at the end, he sort of looks to ascend beyond just like the revenge fantasy. Like he has these second thoughts. And I just think that part it really wrapped it up well. I feel like everyone's got to read it. And if you do read it, you have to read either this translation, which is the Penguin Classics, this one, or newer. This one is translated by Robin Buss for Penguin Classics. If you so much as read an abridged version of this tale, you would not think a nonfiction book about the assembly of a computer to be interesting in any sort. And this isn't even like the first computer or like the first personal computer. This is just one computer among other versions that were available at the time from a company that no longer exists. In Tracy Kidder's The Soul of a New Machine, you may not be able to see the title here because I got the rare, shiny edition of this cover. I don't know how rare that is. He does just that. He walks you through, so the company that he's following, this is a nonfiction book, by the way, he follows the corporate culture and the minds behind the development of this computer and how they made this product get out the door. And it is really captivating and fascinating how it's done. I learned so much about like the formation of early computers, and to think of all this brain power and development that had to go into it, which is sort of a truly new process for computer engineers, was just really, really cool. Guido Marcelli wrote Despo HG, or The Vanishing, right before he took his own life. And I think you can get some of the themes in there in this novel. For instance, it starts with a character who is contemplating suicide, and he finally talks himself down from it, and then he walks back to his cabin. In the morning when he wakes up, every single person on Earth has disappeared without a trace, just completely vanished. I was thinking that this novel was going into the direction of man tries to survive in an environment with no people. But it actually is more, it was much more philosophical. He's sort of pondering how the world works. He's like thinking about all these philosophers. He's contemplating his own loneliness. He deliberately moved to this isolated area to be away from people. And now that there's no people here, he's sort of desperate for attention, companionship, and he visits the homes of his ex-partners. And he sort of just looks around and remembers. He's not starving at all. He's got plenty of electricity. He's getting fatter on all this extra food laying around that's free. Essentially, just a really cool, really unique novel. I wish he would have been able to live long enough to see it published. Thomas Hardy publishes a novel where his main character, his female main character, just suffers abuse after abuse after abuse for no real reason. Every time she looks like she's about to turn things around, someone comes and knocks her down. She is assaulted at a very young age and is scandalized from it. And everywhere she looks, she is haunted by this past. Her family is very poor, and she looks to make working extremely hard manual labor to help her family, and yet they stumble deeper and deeper into poverty. She never ever has a redemption. Yet this book is so fascinating. The environment that he puts everyone in, this theoretical Wessex, it's just sort of rustic parts of England, is just so wonderfully developed. And I think this sort of atheistic theme that he's developed, where there is no God that can help you, the virtuous or the non-virtuous, it's sort of like life happens and life sucks, and sometimes it's unfortunate for everyone. I think that is such a fantastic theme, and I don't think anything else could be written like this at all today. It just wouldn't happen like this. So this is a really unique book. I'm looking forward to reading more of Hardy. I've heard Jude the Obscure is this and 10 times worse, so I'm a little nervous about reading that one so far, but it's on the shelf. I'll get to it. Ted Chiang in Exhalation puts together an incredible collection of science fiction stories where he tweaks or changes significantly like one major part about our world and sort of lets the characters play in that new reality. One of the stories was the basis behind the movie Arrival. It's quite different. I haven't seen the movie Arrival, but it's clearly quite different. But I don't even think that was even close to some of the best stories in here. I would like to see him take one of his ideas and sort of extend it into a longer novel and see if he has it with like developing characters and themes, because he definitely has the creative mind for it. The Best Short Stories of Jack London was originally 35 cents when it was sold as this perma book. So it's pretty frail now, but they've told me it will last forever. This is 70 years old, so I have to give it credit for that, even though it is falling apart, perma book or otherwise. So I'm not sure if this collection of short stories is the same as other best collections of short stories. So I might not be able to comment on that, but I can comment on Jack London's writing. I love the fact that he brings his characters into like hostile, forbidding environments and just like explores those with such realism. How to Build a Fire is a man getting stranded in the snow and how it can go from worrying to worse so quickly. Another favorite story is A Piece of Steak. It's where this boxer, just aging out of the ring, is being usurped by a younger star. He's recalling the time when he was in the other man's position, and as the fight progresses, it looks like he almost has it. It's got that tension, it's got that realism, it's so gritty. Everybody knows already what Moby Dick by Herman Melville is about. It's about a man killing an animal. However, it is much more. Moby Dick is an experience. It just has so much going on. First of all, it's much funnier than I thought it would be. It's much more captivating than I thought it would be. And even before you get to the whale, he's like preparing and thinking about going on this ship. It's part like whale textbook, it's part character study, it's a part like it's sectioned off into these little pieces where the boat meets up with other boats. It's like a weirdly structured but really cool book that I recommend everybody reading, and I would not skip the textbook portions. I think those are just as pivotal as all the rest. It's just sort of getting into the mindset of what a whaler would think at the time. And it's only 600 pages, well, at least this crazy tour edition is only 600 pages. So you can do it. It's a lot more approachable than you might think. This is another beautiful short NYRB classics, The Violins of St Jax by Patrick Lee Fermor. So this is the only fiction work that he ever produced. He's famous for like his travelogues, which I guess used to be a thing when people would travel to foreign places and then like write stories about it, and then people back home would be like, wow, how exotic. But he sort of like takes that format and he makes like a fictional version of it. And so like this writer is talking with this woman who previously lived on a nearby island. And so the story that she's going through, she's like talking about her family, and then something dramatic and climactic happens in this story, in her retelling of the story. And it just like, it goes from like this sort of like jaunty tale about like manners and family dynamics, and then it becomes like, oh my god, this is crazy. I don't want to spoil that for you because reading that part of it is like the experience of the book. This book is so great. It's really short. It's really easy to plug through. So you don't have to wait long for that to happen. I can't believe I found and read this book. Like, what a treasure. Like, what a little gem. I'm gonna need Allie Smith to explain the dream sequences in Autumn, because those were almost nonsensical to me. Very cool, very unique. I felt like she was flexing a lot. She was like, look how cool I can write. Why don't you keep up with me? The principal story follows a woman who is friends with an older man in a completely benign way. He's just like the most kind, generous, nice person. And she grows up with him. She's a young child when she first meets him, and then she grows up with him, and he ends up in this coma. And she's sort of becoming his primary caregiver and waiting for him to wake up. It takes place during Brexit. Like, there's this tension between her and her mother. She's sort of a weirdo. Her mother is a lot more normal, but can't quite understand her. So there's a little bit of friction there. But the way it all comes together in the end. Oh, also it's about pop art and women in the art world. So by the end, all of these pieces sort of fall together, and it's actually a really quick read. You'd think, looking at the book, that it's like a normal 300-page book, but the text is so large and there's like so many white pages that at the end of the day, it only took me like a day and a half to read. Joseph J. Ellis in Founding Brothers makes the Founding Fathers seem so interesting. All he really does is take snippets from their correspondence and sort of compiles them into this narrative about how they interacted from the early days up until their older age as they start to die. To see the revolution through their eyes and the governance of early America was just really fascinating. There's like all sorts of characters in here. There's Ben Franklin, there's Adams, Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton. He sort of walks through all of them individually. I think you can clearly see that he has a preference for Jefferson, Adams, and Washington, but those are also some of the most interesting characters, so it does make sense. Just to compile all of this knowledge and information in such a captivating, readable way in such a short book, gotta hand it to him, and I'm looking forward to reading his other books. Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a book that occupies my brain a lot because it's hard to decide. It's so complicated in the dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics of these people. First of all, it is written so beautifully. What a way with words GGM has. Just so incredible. And the characters in the setting that he's developed, so complex, so rich. The way he shows them aging from a younger age to an older age is just so smooth. It doesn't feel like there's a single jump cut into the future. It's just sort of this gradual, flowing transition from their development as young lovers all the way up into their old age. There is a complicated problem with this book. So the protagonist is Fermina, and she is dating Florentino, and they have this sort of powerful young love. But at some point, Fermina breaks it off, and she goes and marries a doctor, Dr. Urbino instead. Florentino never quite gets over this. He has such a passion for her that no matter what he does, it turns into sort of an extreme obsession. Meanwhile, he's going through his life trying to cure himself of this obsession by dating almost everyone in this little community that he has. He dates single mothers, married women, younger women, unfortunately, at some point, a child, and like a 13-year-old. And so this is like really conflicting because he does a lot of bad things that is just the culmination of everything that makes me grossed out by this man. And it definitely spoiled a little bit the last bit of the story where there's like, it actually turns into like a more truly traditional love story, because you're like, oh my God, this man does not deserve happiness because he is the worst person on earth. And that realization comes so gradually. At some points I'm like wondering, like, what did the author intend to do here? Did he intend for you to feel that way? I can't help but think he's gotta, right? That's gotta be how he wants you to think. But so that complicated moral dilemma in my mind really doesn't want him to be happy by the end. But it is a really interesting, cool story, and I'm looking forward to reading 100 Years of Solitude. Damon Galgut's The Promise is a heavy book. It's structured in a way that you look at each piece of this crumbling white family, so each member sort of gets their own section. What all ties this together is the promise that the matriarch made to their black servant that she would get to own the house that she lives in. And there's no reason why she shouldn't, but over time, this promise gets further and further away from reality. The setting of apartheid South Africa is a really unique one for me. I've never read a book set in South Africa before, and the way he approaches the subject and the divisions between races is really well done. Also, Galgut has a really unique style. I like when he often does this thing where he like has a little aside where he'll be like, he'll say something and he'll be like, excuse me, and then something else is what he really means or something like that. It's hard to explain. He also has like a visceral style at sometimes. He's often mentions bodily fluids more than I thought he would, but otherwise really heavy, really good novel. Won the Booker Prize, so there's that. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin is a really deftly written novel set on an ice planet. So the main character is this emissary that comes down from this economic union of other planets to land on this one and sort of try to convince them to join this union. The unique thing about the people on this planet is that they are both genders, so they sort of operate in both gender roles in society, and she uses that to explore essentially how we treat women today, and how those divisions in genders affect us. The setting she chooses is this ice planet. She has these like sections of mythology that are so rich in the middle. The friendship between the main character and Lord Estraven is also really neat and really well done. Like just like this delicate relationship between two people that is just handled so nicely. So many science fiction or fantasy works focus so much on like the world building. Ursula K. Le Guin does it effortlessly while also making such an engaging, rich, emotional story. Like, no one could do it like her. Tim O'Brien wrote The Things They Carried, and that is a war collection of short stories. This is so completely different from that. I was so surprised to learn that they were the same author. So this is a book that is full of these loops, red herrings, lies. It follows this man that you don't even know his real name because he lies about absolutely everything as he transverses the United States. First, he robs a bank, takes the teller with him. She goes with him more than willingly, and they have these crazy adventures with all these bizarre people along the way, and it's almost unexplainable, but it's really funny, and you always are kind of thinking like, is this the truth? Is this a lie? And just it wraps itself all up so neatly. There's definitely some clumsy moments. There's this recurring transfer of viewpoint to these people called like the truth seeders, and people who are like seeding lies to the media so that it becomes the reality. I think that was a little more clunky, and perhaps I think some of the jokes and references will be out of date in a few years. But as it stands, I really liked the way he put this together. And I think this is just so smart, clever, and fun. And I haven't really read a lot of things like this except for Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Blade Runner is the title of the book here, but the original title of the book was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. So the movie Blade Runner is based on the book, but the movie is kind of, I don't know, people love the movie, but I think it's a little hokey, little goofy. The book is so completely different in tone. So it follows a police officer, like an agent that is tasked with taking down androids. And androids are in this world are identical to humans in almost every respect. It's so difficult to tell them apart that the lines are completely blurred. There's also this worship of life that comes in the form of these artificially created animals that are so close to the real thing that they might as well be the same. And this just exploration, it's so trippy, it's so weird, it's so cool how he explores this boundary between life and artificial, and this distinguishing factor here, and it kind of winds itself around as things go on. It's just really cool. The first 20 pages, though, very painful. Once you get through the first 20 pages, the story really picks up and gets started. And I don't think I've ever read anything like this before, and I'm definitely going to check out more Philip K. Dick in the future. I got to appreciate the grandma that goes through old wood carvings and prints in order to make the covers of all these Norton Critical Editions, because she actually found a relevant one this time. These are the ugliest possible editions of any book, but they have some of the best stuff in them. They've got this like critical section at the end where they talk about reading. They have reviews and essays from other authors, so you can really analyze the book that you're reading, and I think that's really cool thing to have and do. But the book itself, even with all of that, is actually quite short. So maybe I haven't named the title yet. It's Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. It is a story about a man, Ethan Frome, truly trapped between two impossible decisions. Either let your existing wife die in favor of love and run away, or stay with her and lose access to this potential burgeoning love that's being developed. In the end, he sort of resolves it a little melodramatically, but this cold countryside atmosphere is very vivid, and that indecision and choice was one of those scenarios where I really felt like I was vacillating between like how you can't just leave someone out to die in favor of love. And she is just such a sort of a uncomfortable, wicked kind of person. She's not like a bad person, but she's just like not warm. She's cold, the wife anyway. Whereas this new woman that comes in his life is like so nice and warm and lovely. And the way it resolves is just sort of like the worst thing possible to happen to both of them. Banana Yoshimoto's Asleep is actually 3 different stories set in one. I like how she makes all of her characters really earnest, really authentic. Even if they aren't really doing that in the stories, the thoughts that they have are so real. None of these are very long, so it's just easy to breeze through each one of them. I particularly liked the last one of the 3. It's called Asleep, the title of the whole book, but it's also the title of the last story. And it's about a woman who just like finds herself dozing off more and more, falling deeper into longer and longer sleeps while her life doesn't really have a purpose. And it was almost scary, but she tells it in such a dreamlike way. It's just such an entrancing story. All 3 of them are really entrancing. I'm really curious to read more from her. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck is a terrifying picture of what America could be and was and could return to again. He makes a great case for hating cops, for collective action, and for supporting each other. The main thrust of the novel follows this family that has worked the land in Oklahoma for generations, and now all of a sudden a bank has taken their land and all of their accumulated wealth has disappeared in a flash. They move out west looking for work where they've been told work is, and all they want to do is work hard and earn a little money to keep their family afloat, and yet they cannot do that. The greedy capitalists have stopped them, the cops have stopped them, and the only way they can succeed is working with their fellow workers. There are these omniscient sections that are sort of inlaid between the chapters where Steinbeck takes the perspective of somebody else living in the Great Depression to feel like what is going on and happening. And those are such a unique little way of structuring the novel. It's really well written as well. I was led to believe that it was really boring and slow, and for a great American novel, I was expecting basically American Dream kind of stuff, but none of that happened. It's really captivating. You feel horrible for these people. There's so much sympathy that you feel reading this book. It just like, it honestly terrified me thinking about what could happen if we didn't have a safety net, and our safety nets are too weak as they are. This book, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, is an absolute treasure of a little novella. It captures the feeling of nostalgia of this brief period in life where nothing could go wrong and everything was wonderful, and in this peak of happiness, even in the mundane. He captures that so perfectly in this book. So our main character moves to this little village in the middle of nowhere, England, to basically uncover this painting that is hidden behind plaster in the walls of a church. He's an art restorer. And as he's uncovering this painting, we're uncovering more about him. We're sort of expanding our view of more characters here. And that action of uncovering and discovery, and that he's penniless essentially, but he just feels happy and content for this moment in his life, especially when so much else has gone wrong. And that just feeling, and that wistful, nostalgic feeling, is just captured so perfectly here. Kindred, Neanderthal Life, Love, Death, and Art by Rebecca Ragg Sykes explores everything we know about Neanderthals. And I'm not really an anthropology guy. I'm not like super into human evolution. It's cool to me, but I'm much more interested in the study of animals. Yet somehow she makes the study of a species of hominid that we know so little about so fascinating. And what I really like is that she explores how each piece of information was discovered in such a captivating way. She's like talking about smoke patterns on walls of caves and how we know how many times people have been there. She's taking like little invisible fragments of bone and what we can glean from the collagen that might be clinging on from it. It is just like such a fascinating book about all we know about hominids, and really explores like, what does it really mean to be like a human? The lack of knowledge about something doesn't mean that that thing didn't happen or did happen. It's just an area for us to explore. I think she illustrates both the knowledge that we have, but also the gaps in our knowledge in such a good, perfect way. This is like the perfect nonfiction book for me about a subject. Just this style, this way of looking at things. I also read Sapiens, and that was also like an interesting book. Didn't quite make the top 50 because he sort of just makes a lot of assertions that he can't quite back up. She backs everything up here, and to think about this like co-species of human living on Earth at the same time, like what an fascinating, bizarre thing that could have happened. So Hemingway has a lot of fans, and he has a lot of people that don't like him, and I totally see why. He writes with this iceberg perspective where you really are seeing only the tip in his writing, and you have to like deduce everything else that's underneath it. Personally, I love that. I loved A Farewell to Arms. That's one of my favorite books I've ever read. This is also a really good book. Doesn't quite meet that threshold that A Farewell to Arms set, but that's an impossibly high threshold. Like, what an amazing book that is. This is also still a really good book. It explores masculinity, the impact that men feel when their masculinity has been stripped, either by physical injury or just like the way that they are. They are just drinking their way through Paris and Spain as they are sort of recovering from the aftermath of World War I. So there's this sort of lost generation feeling between them. He does compare a woman to the curves of a boat. So there is that in there, but just putting that aside, it is such a fascinating, really cool book. I just cemented my love for Hemingway. I've heard that All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy is actually his tamest book, which is wild to me because there was certainly a lot of gore and injury in this one. So it's written in just like such a unique style. Like he uses these words that are just in the back of the dictionary somewhere that no one else has uttered in 1,000 years, and he just pulls it out and uses it perfectly. So I did have a dictionary on hand, of course, while reading this. There's also parts that are in Spanish. It's like simple Spanish, so if you have any knowledge at all of the language, you can follow along with it, though I have heard that there are editions that do have the translations of the Spanish in the back, so you can look for that. It is about a younger man. He's like 16, and they're just sort of at the end of the cowboy era, but he's not done living that dream. So he basically runs away to Mexico to work on a horse farm with his friend, and there's like adventures along the way. There's adventures there, and then eventually they're taken away and brought somewhere else, and it's just done so, like the imagery that he has, like the writing, I just like, there's not even words that I have for it. It's just so unique, so powerful, so well done. Like you really can see so perfectly this like cowboy lifestyle that they're living. I don't know how he does it, but this is just incredible. My first McCarthy, I mean, there's 2 more books in this trilogy, and there's like 100 other books, and I've also got like the 2 newest ones up here. R.I.P. McCarthy, who passed this year, but he's definitely got a large body of work for me to dig through over the course of years. I've heard Annie Proulx be compared to McCarthy in terms of her writing style, and I see it, but she's so much more funny and has so much more cleverness to her writing, at least in the shipping news. Than in All the Pretty Horses. Of course, I have not read either of their 2 catalogs, so I can't give you such a thorough comparison, but she starts this novel with like the most pathetic character on earth. I think she calls him like a damp loaf of bread, and I just started it like, his name is Coyle, and I just started it like, ugh, I'm not sure if I can read such a long book about such a pathetic, useless man. But then you were just drawn right in. Somehow he's been able to have 2 children, and upon his wife leaving him, their aunt drags all 4 of them up to her ancestral home in, I think, Labrador, Canada. Apparently, the customs and everything that she creates is not really native to Labrador. I mean, she did live there. I would have thought she would have known and done it right, but I guess she just decided on her own path, or maybe she is telling the truth and the people from Labrador are just embarrassed about eating fried bologna. But the world that she creates there with all of these cleverly named, goofy people with such rich individual personalities, it is so clever and funny. She is just such a fantastic writer. This won both the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize at the same time. One of the few books to do that. Very, very well deserved. To see the evolution of this pathetic, damp loaf of a man all the way up to this like nice, loving father who's capable of raising a family and moving on his own is just like such a perfect evolution of a character, and she does it with so much humor along the way. It's also a really great story. She separates out each section into like by knots and like the knot type. I could figure out most of them and what they did with the story. Maybe I'm not sure about all of them, but it's like all of these nautical terms that she uses. Just so perfectly well done in every aspect. I have Barkskins on my shelf somewhere back here, which is a much more Herculean effort. It's a very long book, but I'm still very excited to read it. If it even comes close to matching up with the shipping news, I think I'll love it. I did read Marie Helene Bertino's Beautyland in 2023, even though it does officially come out in early 2024, because I got an early copy because that's sometimes what happens when you ask the publisher for something. They'll send it to you, and I'm happy to review it. I've already reviewed this twice, and now I'm talking about it again. So if you're influenced to buy this, I think I've done my job. It is called Beautyland, and that is a very fitting title because it is so beautifully written. The metaphors that she uses are just so incredible. Just what she has done here is just insanely good. It follows Adina, who is essentially born from a human mother, looks like a human, biologically is a human, everything about her is human, but it is revealed to her through fax machine messages that she gets, as well as these recurring dreams that she has, that she is actually alien. And they have sent her down to Earth to report on the conditions of Earth to see if it's safe for them to return. So she always throughout the entire book feels this sense of loneliness and alienation and not quite fitting in, and it's sort of unclear, is like that her alien aspect, is that just like human aspects that makes us individual. It is so touching and poignant. When it ended, I was just blown away, so sad, just so like not a wasted word in here. The way she carries her from childhood to adulthood, there are no missteps. This is an incredible book. I have long heard about how intimidating reading Virginia Woolf is, but I feel like I was like, I gotta give it a shot. And I am so glad I did, because while I definitely struggled early on in the book to keep track because she does not like periods, semicolons, commas, there's like 8 periods in this entire book. She just lets those sentences run. What a brave choice as well, because I can see getting started on this book and being like, I can't do this. But if you muddle through, it creates this sense of, so you're looking at individual people's like minds and thoughts, and she jumps from character to character to character without any warning. You just have to sort of figure it out how it happened. I was often rereading pages just to figure out what was like fully going on and getting a full picture of things, because there's like all of these like little details that surround like these really important things that are just like hidden in between them, and these like key aspects to people's thoughts. Like, the way I'm describing it probably sounds like a miserable reading experiences, but it's just so unique and powerful. And everyone is just, it just all takes place over the course of like a single day. Every character in this novel is sort of in Clarissa Dalloway's orbit. It's her husband, it's like a former lover, and just like bouncing from character to character and all of their thoughts, you really get a true picture of like all of their relationship to her in just like such a special way. There's only like 2 or 3 instances in the book that actually move like the plot forward. These are pretty dramatic instances. It does primarily follow Clarissa Dalloway, but there's also this secondary character, Septimus. It's supposed to be her like twin. That connection is like a little more tenuous than I would think, but it does work really well. It's really hard to describe unless you've read it. Definitely skip the introduction. There's a hardcore spoiler. There's like 2 things that happen in the book, and the introduction spoils it. I'm done with introductions now. I only read them after the book is over, and my reading has been so much more enriched for it. This is not like a traditional novel in any sense, and to think how gay it is so surprising to me, that it was written so far back in time, and it is, and how blatantly gay it is. Like, how did she get away with that is what I wonder. But it's done really well, really sensitively. Oftentimes when you think about gay characters in old novels, it's like there's just so much homophobia. None. It just works here. So there's just like so much about it to love, and so much about it that's interesting and creative, that blew my mind, that I have the To the Lighthouse on my shelf, so I'm looking to read that. I've heard Orlando's really good. I've heard The Waves are really good. I really want to read Three Guineas, which is another book I have, that's like these essays that she's written, or these lectures that she's given. Of course, A Room of One's Own, a key piece of feminist literature. What a tragic story, Virginia Woolf, but what a talent that she was. Number 1 favorite novel of the year, favorite novel I've ever read at this point, is Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. I don't even know where to start with this, because it has just absolutely blown my mind right open. The writing and the power that she has to create such a rich, real novel is insane. I've since read The Bluest Eye, and it has a lot of those elements. It's not as put together as it is here. That is a lot more blatant, a lot more specific. This is a little bit more wider in scope, and oh my God, she explores the relationship between a boy named Milkman Dad and his family, and people in his community. And it's this Black community that's set in the time of the lynching of Emmett Till, to give context. And it explores him in his community. So he's living with sort of a richer father who's a landlord of a number of poor African Americans in the community. So he has this sort of detached sense of privilege compared to his colleagues. That distinction is like comes up so many times in so many different ways throughout the book, and both his attitude and the way people treat him and the way he treats others. She completely explores this community, and just at the moment where that has like just about reached the brim of the glass, she sends him on an odyssey back to his like ancestral homeland in a sort of a quest. She said when she was writing this book that she's written almost all of her other books with women as the main protagonists, and she wanted to do a man. And I think that she does this like sort of animalistic, this testosterone fueled sense of like recklessness so insanely well. I could not stop raving about this novel. My goal is to read all of Toni Morrison in the next year or 2. We'll see how that happens, but this, like, as no novel has affected me the way this one does. I think you should either read this or another one of her books at some point in your life. The power that she has over language is absolutely unmatched. And I haven't even read Beloved yet. Like, I haven't read the vast majority of her work. So my opinion on her is only going to grow when I read more. So if you've made it this far and you're here at the end, you did it. Congratulations. Give me those watch hours. That's what I want. I want those watch hours from you. What should I do next? I mean, this is taking so much time and effort. I'm not even sure if I can edit this. I hope more than like my mom watches this. That would be neat.